The roses on his coffin were still fresh when she leaned in, her perfume sharp against the smell of lilies, and whispered, "Your time's up." I didn't cry. I just held my gloves tighter and thought, "Fine, then I'll give you mine." With interest. Before we start the story, tell me where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to subscribe. The lilies had soured in the heat by noon, their sweetness turned thick and bruised under the ceiling fans. Savannah light slid through the lace curtains in pale ribbons, catching on the dust that never settled the way people promised grief would. Ham biscuits sweated on silver trays. Someone's perfume, gardenia, too much of it, clung to my throat like a hand. I sat in my husband's favorite wingback by the parlor window, black gloves smooth on my lap, and watched our magnolia tree hold itself steady in the wet air. Tiffany moved through the rooms like a hostess in a magazine spread. Chin high, waist cinched in black silk, a string of pearls that didn't quite match themselves. She looped an arm through a deacon's wife, laughed a little too loud by the punch bowl, straightened a frame that had been crooked for 30 years and called it freshening. People let their eyes follow her like it was polite. She wanted the house to learn her walk. "Bless your heart, Mags," someone said, patting my shoulder, their fingertips lingering as if sympathy were something you could leave behind like a calling card. I smiled around it, the way I've smiled through hurricanes and roof leaks, and folded my hands tighter. Tiffany waited until folks drifted toward the dining room before she came to me. She bent low as if to kiss my cheek, her hair brushing my veil. The pearl earring on her left ear clicked against the lens of my glasses. She smelled like lemon and ambition. "Your time's up," she whispered, her mouth still smiling. "We'll take it from here." We. As if my son were a thought she could carry in her purse. I met her eyes over the tiny ladder of my veil. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I held her gaze the way you hold a porch door in a storm. Quiet, braced, intent on keeping what's inside from being peeled away. I said softly, the way women in this city say no without giving it the dignity of the word. She straightened, brightness snapping back onto her face like a light switched on. "How are we doing on coffee?" She trilled to no one and everyone. "Make sure the cups are the good china." The good china was in a locked cabinet in my pantry. I watched a cousin try to open it and then pretend to be admiring the wood grain. Ryan kept to the edges, his tie a fraction crooked, his grief folded and tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket like an inconvenient receipt. Every time I glanced up, he found a new reason to step into another room, answering the door, taking a call, nodding gravely at a man who once sold us a busted water heater. "Too emotional," he'd told someone in the kitchen when I walked in, and he didn't see me, and the words sat in my stomach like a stone. "Such a blessing to finally meet the lady of the house," Mrs. Calloway said near the mantel. Tiffany's smile didn't slip. "That's me now," she said, like it was a toast. "The lady of the house." An old friend of my husband's looked my way, frowning, then smoothed his face into something neutral the minute Tiffany caught his eye. People like a story they can read without moving their lips. I let them. In the doorway, Geneva Rowe leaned her small frame against the casing, a simple black dress and a cane she didn't need unless she wanted a seat saved. Geneva is 77 and keeps a tax code in her head the way other women keep recipes. When our eyes met, she didn't tilt her chin or purse her lips. She just tipped her index finger once toward the study down the hall. A minute. A move. "These geraniums are thirsty." Tiffany scolded no one again, pinching a leaf like it had personally offended her. She didn't see the way Geneva slid her hand across my shoulder as she passed and let her thumb press, quick and warm, against the seam of my glove. It was a small blessing disguised as a habit. In the dining room, somebody started a story about my husband catching a 20-pound catfish on a line that was never meant for it. People laughed the way they do when they need the sound to say more than the joke. I listened through the wall as the old house held its breath and counted its cracks. Heat makes ceilings talk. So does grief. When the last casserole had been wrapped in foil, and the last pastor had promised prayer with one hand on his own car keys, Tiffany stood on the bottom stair where the hallway opens to the foyer and clinked a spoon against a punch glass. "Thank you all for coming into our home today," she said, looking like a debutante pinned to her own idea of grace. "We'll take good care of it." She meant the house, the history, the narrative. I let her have the sentence, not the truth. By 5 o'clock, the parlor had that hollowed-out quiet houses get when the crowd leaves and you can hear the refrigerator hum as if it's tired too. I took off my gloves and laid them on the arm of the chair. The skin at my wrists looked like parchment folded and unfolded 100 times. No one tells you how loud the air gets when people stop buzzing around you like flies around sugar. I stood. The floorboards knew my weight and didn't creak. In the study, my husband's room and mine when the weather turned mean, I turned the brass key on the bottom drawer of the old walnut desk and slid it open. The smell met me first. Ink, paper, the faint citrus of old polish, the ghost of his cologne corked to the wood from 100 mornings and 1,000 bills paid on time. The estate file was where I'd left it, manila and ugly as truth. I untied the string, smoothing the flap, with a palm that didn't shake. Pages in order, schedules clipped, birth certificates and mortgage satisfactions, letters you only write once. I flipped to the page people ask about first and understand last. Beneficiaries. Blank. He'd left the line for me to write, because he knew two things better than anybody: how to level a shelf without a spirit, and how to let me decide our endings. I set my finger lightly where a name would go if I were inclined to be generous in the way Savannah women are trained to be, lavish with grace to our detriment. In the hallway, the front door opened and shut, Tiffany's voice carrying like a ribbon you can't cut. "We'll have the locks changed Monday," she was saying to someone on the phone, all sugar sharpening into vinegar. "So people know where to bring things." I closed the file as carefully as I'd opened it and slid it back into the drawer. The brass key turned in the lock with a sound like a piano string being tuned. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and looked at my husband's portrait over the fireplace, him at 35 with his first good suit, and a smile that apologized for nothing. I reached for my pen, the one that signed our mortgage and our children's permission slips and 37 Christmas cards a year, and smiled, small, private, at the blank beneficiary page waiting to be written by the only lady this house had ever needed. The azaleas in front of Geneva Rose's house had bloomed themselves into a pink riot, but inside her parlor it was cool, dim, and lined with more legal books than the courthouse downtown. I sat on her chintz sofa, the one with the pattern that looked like English tea roses if you squinted, and set my gloves on the coffee table. "Tiffany thinks she owns this house," I said. My voice was flat, measured, like I was reading a grocery list, not my own obituary in bricks and mortar. Geneva looked up over her reading glasses, the silver chain swinging like a pendulum of judgment. "And you want to let her, just long enough?" I leaned back, watching dust drift through the beam of sunlight between her lace curtains. Just long enough. She didn't ask why. That's the thing about Geneva. You don't have to explain a war to someone who's already fought 3. She reached for a yellow legal pad and started scribbling in her compact, no-nonsense script. Transfer agreement, gift of real property, conditions embedded. She'll smile at it, thinking she's got the crown jewels. "She's getting something," I murmured. Geneva's pen paused mid-stroke. "She's getting liabilities, and I'm making sure she signs every single one like she's autographing a fans program." We worked through the details. A gift of the house, wrapped up in a bow of liens and obligations, back taxes scheduled to reappear like bad weather, HOA disputes just waiting for a signature, and a flood zone insurance requirement set to hit next season. The HVAC was half-gutted too, metal ducts yawning open in the attic like unstitched wounds. The repair loan was tied to the property, not the person. Tiffany would inherit it the moment her name touched the page. She wanted my life, I said, watching Geneva fill in clause after clause. She'll get the bills too. Geneva's eyes glinted behind the glasses. You're signing her name onto problems she can't pronounce. By the time we were done, the document was a Trojan horse in cream stationery, a gift horse whose smile hid a mouthful of lawsuits. Geneva stapled the last page and tapped the stack twice against the table. She'll frame this on her Instagram wall, Geneva said dryly, and never see the cracks until she falls through one. I stood, feeling the air shift as I moved. Outside, the street shimmered in late afternoon heat, cicadas sawing through the silence. The house across the way, the one Tiffany thought she'd just stepped into like a throne, was mine in ways she'd never understand. Every dent in the banister, every creak in the second stair, every faint scent of lemon oil from polishing day. Those were the true deeds, the invisible kind that don't file at the county clerk. Back home, I slipped off my shoes in the hallway and listened. Old houses breathe. This one exhaled around me like it knew we still belonged to each other. I went to the attic, the heat pressing down like a hand, and pulled down boxes one by one. The silver tea set, real, went into the cedar trunk for safekeeping. The one in the dining room was a clever, nickel-plated twin, my mother's cameo brooch, the quilt my grandmother hand-stitched during the war, the oil painting of the marsh at sunrise, all wrapped in tissue and packed away. The parlor mantel kept its display, china figurines, family photos in heavy frames, a brass clock that hadn't worked in 20 years. Those could stay. Let her polish them until her wrists ached. There's nothing of value in them except the dust. When I lifted the last box, my hands didn't shake. I felt light. Not from grief, not from loss. Light the way you feel when you've just shifted the whole weight of a problem onto someone else's doorstep. Downstairs, I stacked the empty boxes in the corner and eyed the shelves. Only the fakes would stay behind. When Tiffany moved in, she'd inherit a house dressed in lies, and not a single thing she could pawn without learning the truth. The conference room at Whitaker and Lane smelled like lemon polish and ink, the scent of things that outlast people. I sat at the end of the oak table with my hands folded over my pocketbook, brooch winking softly at my collarbone. Across from me, Tiffany perched like a magazine spread come to life. Sleek ponytail, nails the color of black cherries, a perfume that could cut through humidity. Mrs. Ellison, the junior associate chirped, sliding a neat stack of papers between us. As discussed, this is a deed of gift. I looked at the title page as if I hadn't helped draft every clause. Lovely, I murmured. Tiffany didn't read. She flipped. She posed. She smiled at the gold seal like it was a camera. Finally, she breathed, pen poised. We can start making this place ours. Yours? I corrected gently. She flashed teeth. Of course. Geneva sat beside me in a lavender jacket that meant business and lavender eyeshadow that meant war. Please initial at each flag, she said, tapping the neon tabs that bloomed along the page edges like polite warnings. Tiffany scrawled a heart over her tea. I watched her sign her name onto a roof lean, then a flood zone rider with the new premium penciled in the margin, then the HVAC property secured loan with its cheerful little variable interest rate. She never blinked. The pen flowed. Her perfume sharpened. Done, she sang, setting the pen down as if she'd just autographed a book. Almost, Geneva said sweetly. Acknowledgement page, as is condition. A nail tapped the paragraph where the house's chipping paint, settling foundation, and active moisture concerns lived in plain, patient English. Tiffany signed on the line. Her bracelet chimed, delicate and stupid. In the elevator afterward, she checked her reflection in the mirrored panel, teeth glinting. "We'll do a reveal on Friday," she said to herself more than to me. People love a good before it was ours post. Outside, the air was thick as syrup. Cicadas sawed. I could taste summer on my tongue. Hot metal and magnolia and a hint of coming rain. Geneva held the building door for me. "You all right?" she asked. "I am," I said. I've never seen anyone walk so quickly into a mortgage she didn't read. By the time I reached home, my phone pinged, then pinged again. Tiffany had posted a photo of herself on the front steps, one hand thrown up in triumph, the other holding the newly minted keys like talismans. The caption, "Finally settled into our forever home." The house behind her looked like it always did, beautiful in a way that made your throat tight. If you didn't know where to listen, you'd never hear the pipes moaning under the floorboards. Ryan called 10 minutes later. His voice came through thin and tinny, like it was coming from a stairwell. "Mom," he said, "Tiff says you're being very generous." I watched a cloud move over the sun, dimming the hallway in a way that shifted shadows on the banister. "I'm being precise," I said. A rustle, as if he was covering the mouthpiece. "She's really excited. She's got ideas for the study. Light walls, floating shelves." "Termites," I said mildly. "Make sure she doesn't float them on a load-bearing wall." Silence. Then, "Okay. Well, dinner soon?" The words were a question dressed as a courtesy. He hung up before I could answer. Geneva arrived an hour later, hair damp at the temples, a manila folder tucked under her arm. We stood at my dining room table, the good runner gone, the cheap one in place, the air conditioner growling like an old dog. She opened the folder like a magician showing the last trick. "New roof lien, recorded. Tap. Flood zone insurance, premium triple come September. Tap. Basement drainage claim, still open. Tap. And the HVAC note, sweet mercy, that rate will sing." "It's like wrapping a gift with mold under the ribbon," I said. Geneva snorted. "Baby, it's like wrapping a gift with a snake." She lingered in the doorway before she left, looking at the mantel where the nickel-plated tea set caught the afternoon light. "You sure you want the fakes to stay?" I patted the cedar trunk where the real set slept, safe as money in a vault. "I want her to spend a month polishing disappointment." That evening, I made myself supper the way widows do when no one is watching. Fried okra crisped to the edge of sin, a tomato sliced warm from the windowsill, cornbread in a skillet older than my children. I ate by the kitchen window, listening to the house settle and breathe around me. Somewhere deep in the walls, a pipe knocked, a low, intimate sound. Promise and warning. My phone pinged again, a calendar invite this time, the kind that doesn't ask, just tells. LOTH, Lady of the House, cocktail, Saturday 7 p.m. The guest list was public. Names from church, from the club, from my bridge table. Everyone but me. The description: celebrate new beginnings in the Ellison home. I stared at the bright little box of information as if it might change if I looked longer. Then I smiled, slow and private, and clicked decline. She'd thrown a party to crown herself. I poured another glass of sweet tea and pictured the envelope Geneva would have hand-delivered by sundown. Homeowner notice, pending repairs. Let her open it between canapés. From my porch, the laughter floated over like perfume. Sweet, cloying, and designed to make you dizzy. The windows of my house, well, her house now, were thrown open, spilling light and voices onto the magnolia-lined street. Music drifted with the damp Savannah air, a mix of jazz and something brittle in its cheer. I sat in my wicker chair, black coffee cooling in my hand, watching my former friends walk up those brick steps with bottles of wine and two bright smiles. They'd been my people once. Now they kissed Tiffany's cheeks, cooed over her dress, and stepped into a space they used to enter through my invitation. Every few seconds, I caught a glimpse through the French doors, her figure framed in the doorway, sequins glittering, one hand on the stem of a champagne flute, the other fluttering in that way people do when they want to be photographed. Geneva had been right. Sometimes you let them have the stage just long enough for the trapdoor to swing. I could hear her voice through the hum of chatter. Tiffany, in her slow, deliberate drawl, was holding court. "We're thinking of modernizing the house," she announced, like a queen discussing the fate of her kingdom. "Starting with the study." I almost laughed into my coffee. The study had been Charles's domain, lined floor to ceiling with mahogany shelves and filled with the scent of old paper and pipe tobacco. And, though Tiffany didn't know, softened beams riddled with the quiet, meticulous work of termites. I leaned forward in my chair, enough for my voice to carry, but not enough to leave the shadows. "That room has termites," I called across the hedges, letting the syllables curl like smoke. "Enjoy the renovation." She froze, smile caught mid-flash. Then her chin lifted. "We'll handle it," she said, tone bright for her audience. But I saw the tightness in her jaw before she turned away. That was my cue. Geneva had been waiting 2 houses down, wearing a pearl pin and a smile that could part fog. She strolled up the walk as if she were just another guest, heels clicking on the brick path. In her hand, a thick cream envelope stamped in red. "Homeowner, notice, pending repairs." She timed it perfectly, slipping through the open French doors just as Tiffany lifted her glass for a toast. A dozen faces turned as Geneva placed the envelope in Tiffany's free hand, leaned in, and murmured something low. Whatever she said pulled the light right out of Tiffany's eyes. Her smile faltered, lips parting as she glanced down at the bold letters glaring from the paper. Geneva stepped back, offered a polite nod, and left the way she came, pausing only to tip her hat toward my porch. I raised my coffee in return. Tiffany tried to recover, tapping her glass for attention, but her voice wavered. "To new beginnings," she managed. The guests echoed her without conviction, the mood already fraying at the edges. I lifted my glass. Not champagne, just sweet tea this time, and toasted her from across the street. The night air was thick with the scent of camellias and canapes cooling under the strain of polite conversation. The party wound down earlier than planned. I watched them file out, shoes clicking on brick, glancing between the glowing windows and my shadowed porch, as if they weren't sure where to look. By the time the last light in the house winked out, my coffee was gone, replaced with the quiet satisfaction that comes when the first domino tips exactly as you intended. The next morning, I was on my porch again, reading the paper, when I saw her through the front window. Hair pulled back, robe hanging loose, Tiffany sat at the dining table with a stack of unopened mail. She slit one envelope lazily, then froze. Her hand went still. Even from here, I could read the bold type across the page. Unpaid back taxes. $14,800 due immediately. Her face drained, the paper trembling in her grip. She shoved back her chair so hard it scraped the floor, stormed across the lawn with the notice clenched in her fist, and jabbed my doorbell. Once, twice, then in a relentless volley that rattled the brass. I set down my paper, slid off my black glove, and reached for the chain. Tiffany showed up on my porch like she owned it, heels digging into the brick, hair done for battle, one manicured hand clutching a folded tax notice like it was a smoking gun. "This," she said, shoving the paper toward me before I'd even finished unlatching the screen door, "wasn't part of the deal." I didn't blink. You didn't read the deal, I replied, voice even as iced tea. Geneva wrote it in 12-point clarity. From the corner of my eye, I saw the curtains in Geneva's front window shift. Moments later, my neighbor stepped across the lawn with the kind of measured stride that said she'd been waiting for this exact summons. She carried a slim leather folio under her arm, a small gold pen clipped neatly to the spine. "Morning," Geneva greeted, her tone sunny as if she were here to borrow sugar. She opened the folio and slid out a sheaf of documents already marked with yellow tabs. "Margaret, I believe she's referring to this section." She tapped one perfectly trimmed nail against the clause in question. "Property tax deferments expire upon transfer of deed. Subsequent owner assumes all outstanding obligations." "I've been covering those taxes yearly for the past 23 years, I said, meeting Tiffany's glare. "They're yours now." Her cheeks flushed a shade that didn't come from blush. "That's $14,000. Geneva's smile didn't waver. "And some change. Due in 30 days. Otherwise?" She let the sentence drift off, letting the weight of foreclosure proceedings hang in the humid air like an uninvited guest. Tiffany glanced toward the street, as if Ryan might magically appear to back her up. She must have texted him, because less than 10 minutes later his sedan pulled up. He stepped out, loosened his tie, and looked between us like a man walking into a storm without an umbrella. "Just fix it," he told her. The words hung there, absurd in their simplicity. I laughed, a short, low sound that startled even me. "She fixed me out of my home," I said. "Now she can fix her fantasy." Ryan rubbed his forehead, muttered something about work calls, and backed toward the car. Tiffany watched him go, eyes narrowing as if she'd just realized she was stranded in the middle of a game she didn't understand the rules to. "Maybe," Geneva said, tucking the folio closed. "You should have had a professional review the contract before signing." "I did," Tiffany snapped. "Not a good one," Geneva replied smoothly. For a moment, the only sounds were the cicadas and the faint hum of an air conditioning unit kicking on somewhere down the block. I let her stand there, shifting on her heels, the summer heat pressing against us both. Finally, she stepped back, tucking the tax notice under her arm like she was afraid I might snatch it away. "This isn't over," she said. "It's barely begun," I murmured, closing the screen door. That night, I sat on my porch swing with a glass of bourbon and the satisfaction of a chess player watching her opponent realize the board was rigged from the start. Geneva joined me, her own drink in hand, and we listened to the distant sound of Tiffany's voice rising in frustration somewhere inside her house. "She'll try to wiggle out of it," Geneva said. "She'll try," I agreed. "And in doing so, she'll find the next trap." It didn't take long. 3 days later, while sorting my morning mail, I spotted another thick envelope addressed to homeowner, but the postman had slipped it under my door by mistake. I recognized the return address immediately, the construction company that had started but never finished sealing the home's foundation last spring. I slid a letter opener along the edge and scanned the bolded total. $7,200. Due immediately. I could almost hear Tiffany's voice when she opened this one, sharper, more panicked, more aware that she hadn't inherited a dream, but a sinking ship with her name bolted to the hull. That afternoon, I watched from my porch as Tiffany stormed out onto the front steps, phone pressed hard to her ear. She paced like a caged animal, shouting into the receiver. Then she stopped mid-word, her face changing as if she just realized exactly what she'd signed for. She looked toward my house and smiled. But it wasn't a friendly smile. Tiffany posted a carousel like a museum docent who'd found a crown, close-ups of grandma's china, a filtered gleam on silver teapots, lace runners smoothed within an inch of their lives. Her caption read, "Still shining. Some women inherit dust. I inherited standards, a black heart, a pearl emoji." I set my coffee down and pinched the bridge of my nose to keep from laughing. Geneva and I had appraised and boxed the true pieces 2 summers ago when Harold's hands began to shake. The best china lived 3 blocks away in Geneva's guest room. The sterling rested in velvet rolls beneath my bed. What Tiffany had were the good replicas we'd bought from a cautious antiques dealer who knew all about families that mistook history for entitlement. At dusk, the house itself made a sound I recognized: old wood settling, not with comfort, but with a careful, guarded breath. Through my lace curtains, I watched her throw the parlor windows wide and usher in a weekend crowd: girlfriends with flat-ironed hair and long nails, neighbors curious as raccoons, a realtor friend sniffing profit like Magnolia. They cooed over the original Chippendale, patted the Queen Anne console, nodded politely at a pair of reception chairs masquerading as antiques. "Why is she reusing the reception chairs?" I heard one whisper, not quiet enough. "Aren't those from the funeral luncheon?" I tasted lemon on my tongue, the sting that comes before a smile. Faux wealth always squeaks if you listen. Geneva came by the next morning in her linen trousers, legal pad tucked under her arm like a hymnal. She perched on my settee without sitting back, her posture all intent. "Ready to lift the floorboards, Margaret?" "Let's take the second floor," I said. "She's been parading the parlor. She hasn't thought to inventory what she can't see." Geneva had already filed the preliminary claim, the one that asserts title to specific items never transferred, never gifted, and meticulously listed in an old rider Harold and I signed the year after Ryan married. We drank our tea while the printer in her home office spit out stamped copies: affidavit of ownership for the highboy, the secretary desk with the hidden compartment, the gilt mirror above the landing, the fainting couch in the blue room, the cedar chest with my mother's initials burned under the lid. At 11, a white moving van rolled up with 2 men I'd used before. Quiet, strong, the kind who lift with their legs and their consciences. Geneva greeted them with a nod and a sheaf of paperwork crisp enough to cut butter. We crossed the street together like 2 ladies headed to a bake sale. Tiffany opened the door in a silk robe, mascara thick as tar. The smell of grapefruit cleaner bled into the heat. "What now?" she said. "Inventory correction," Geneva replied, voice honeyed. She held up the affidavit so Tiffany could see the seal flash. "These never passed title. We're reclaiming." "You're stealing," Tiffany snapped, stepping into the doorway like a guard dog. "Reclaiming," Geneva said again, each syllable polished, with documentation. The movers didn't look at Tiffany. They looked at Geneva's list, then at the mirrored landing, then at me. I nodded once. The mirror lifted from its hooks with a soft kiss of release. Down it went, followed by the secretary desk that had been my mother's first, the cedar chest that still held the ghost of camphor. On the second-floor hall, our footsteps sounded like sensible shoes in a library. By the time we reached the highboy in the blue room, Tiffany's voice had gone thin. "You can't—" Geneva didn't raise her tone. "You never filed a bill of sale. You never received written gift acknowledgement. The rider predates your marriage." "Ryan!" Tiffany bellowed down the stairs. "Ryan!" He didn't appear. Somewhere below, a faucet ran too long, then stopped. My heart made no move toward pity. We left the parlor untouched. Let her keep her reception chairs and reproduction teapot. Let her keep the illusions. The movers folded quilts with reverence, wrapped corners in thick paper. In the stairwell, I trailed my glove along the banister. Harold sanded the summer the air conditioner died, and I felt the grain rise like a memory returning to the surface. When the van doors closed, Tiffany stood on the porch with her arms crossed so tightly the skin whitened at her elbows. The day had turned heavy. Thunder sat far off like an uncle who might visit or might not. "I'm calling the police," she said. "Do," Geneva murmured, passing her a copy of the affidavit. "And give them this." They came, eventually, two officers with polite hats and bored eyes. Tiffany led them through every room we hadn't emptied, gesturing at absence like it was a crime scene. The older one read our paperwork under his breath, lips moving, then handed it back. "Ma'am," he said to Tiffany, gentle as a deacon, "without proof of ownership or transfer, this is a civil matter. We can't intervene." "So you're just going to let them?" He tipped his hat. "You'll want a lawyer." His tone said, "A better one." As the cruiser rolled away, the porch lights flicked on, bathing Tiffany in a flat gold that did her no favors. Behind her, the windows reflected a truer inventory. No guilt, no gleam, no history left to claim, just the faint outline of those reception chairs, stubborn and small. That night, I sat by my upstairs window with tea cooling in my hand. Across the street, she paced the hallway, back and forth, like a metronome losing time. Near midnight, a courier in a raincoat hustled up her steps and slid a white envelope through the slot. Even from here, the black stamped header was readable when she held it under the hall sconce. County Treasurer's Office, past due property taxes. The first call came before sunrise. Tiffany's voice was tight, sharp. "The downstairs bathroom's flooded, pipes backed up. The plumber says it's gonna cost $5,600. Mag sat at her kitchen table, coffee cooling in her hands. "Then you'd better pay the man," she said, voice as smooth as riverstone. "You're the one who—" Tiffany stopped herself, recalibrated. "This falls under the warranty, right?" Geneva, already across the table with a folder open, leaned into the phone's speaker. "Home warranty expired 2 months before transfer. Page 4 of the agreement, paragraph 3. Home gifted as is, no liability transfers." Her tone was sugar-coated steel. Silence from Tiffany. Then low and venomous. "This is war." Later that afternoon, Ryan showed up. He didn't sit, just hovered in the doorway. "Can't we just talk to her? This is getting out of hand." Mags folded her hands. "You married her. That means you live in the house you took from me, and you pay for what it costs to keep it standing. It's not—" He stopped, because even he knew the line wouldn't survive daylight. Geneva slid a legal envelope across the table. "We'll be filing a cease and desist for harassment. She's called twice today, and that's twice too many." That evening, Mags made out a check. Not to Tiffany, not to a plumber, but to the Savannah Chronicle. In the memo line, "Legacy ad." The Sunday edition would carry a half-page spread, a sepia-toned photograph of her late husband in uniform, his hand resting on the porch rail of the house. Beneath it, the words, "Everything we built now rests in the right hands." No names, no accusations, just a statement only the guilty would hear as an indictment. By Monday, the calls stopped. For 2 days, there was nothing but cicadas and the creak of the front gate in the summer wind. Then the video hit her inbox. It was Tiffany, sitting in her immaculate living room, makeup smudged like she'd rubbed her eyes too hard. The camera was too close, catching the raw edges, lip trembling, breath hitching, anger tripping over desperation. "This woman, my husband's mother, is trying to ruin me. She dumped a broken house in my lap. She's turned my friends against me. And now she's—" The words dissolved into a half-sob, half-laugh, the kind people make when they realize their audience might be bigger than they intended. Mags didn't watch to the end. She didn't need to. Geneva did, though, leaning back in her chair with a slow, satisfied smile. "She's unraveling in public. That's better than anything we could have written ourselves." Mags only sipped her tea, eyes on the magnolia tree outside her window. Let her pull every thread. 2 hours later, the video started trending. Not for Tiffany's tears, but because someone had stitched it with the clip of her whispering at the funeral. "Your time's up." The internet was about to choose sides, and Mags already knew which way the wind would blow. Ryan showed up without calling first. Never a good sign. He hovered just inside the doorway, hands shoved deep in his pockets like he was visiting a stranger's house. The smell of Geneva's pecan pie drifted from the kitchen, but he didn't comment, didn't ask for a slice. "I'm here to try and make this right," he began, his voice the same careful customer service tone he used when he didn't want to get in trouble. Mag stayed in her chair, one ankle crossed over the other, her black-gloved hands resting on the armrest. "Between whom?" "You and Tiff. He exhaled through his nose. "I'm neutral in all this." Her gaze lifted slowly from her teacup to his face. Neutral. The word landed like a gavel. She didn't need to say it out loud, but her eyes did. "You already chose." Geneva entered from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a linen towel, her presence somehow making the air denser. "Neutrality," she said dryly, "is the choice you make when you want the benefits of both sides without paying the cost of either." Ryan bristled. "I just don't want the family torn apart." "Too late for that," Mag said, her tone smooth, her focus returning to the tea as though he'd interrupted her reading. The conversation shifted from personal to transactional, the way all things did when Geneva was involved. She laid a single sheet of paper on the table. "Margaret's will has been updated. All remaining family assets, monetary, property, business, are now held in a non-family trust." Ryan blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means," Geneva said evenly, "you and Tiffany don't inherit a cent. Not even a serving spoon." He looked at his mother, searching for some crack in her resolve. "Do I get anything?" Mags met his eyes, her expression unchanging. "You get your last name. Carry it well." Geneva began placing other documents on the table, thicker this time, stapled and tabbed. Mags didn't look at them. She'd already approved every word. "This," Geneva explained, "is a formal statement for legal protection. It confirms the full transfer of the house and property to Tiffany, along with complete disclosure of every debt, lien, and tax liability tied to it. A gift, as defined by law. A binding one." Ryan shifted, clearly uneasy. "Why put it in writing like that?" Mags finally set down her teacup. "Because silence is useful, but paper is permanent." They sat in stillness for a beat too long, the only sound the faint ticking of the mantel clock. Then Mags reached into the desk drawer and slid something small toward him, a single house key. He hesitated before picking it up. "What's this for?" "The shed," she said. "Your father's tools are in there. That's all you'll ever need from me." Ryan's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He left without touching the pie. That evening, Geneva and Mag sat at the dining table under the low amber light, the signed statement between them. Geneva slipped it into an envelope, sealed it, and wrote in neat cursive, "For counsel." "You ready?" Geneva asked. "Always." The next morning, Geneva walked into Tiffany's lawyer's office and slid the envelope across the desk. He opened it, scanned the first page, and by the time he reached the debt liability clause, his face had gone pale. "Oh," he said softly. "This changes everything." He was halfway through a paper cup when Geneva slid the statement across his desk. He read the first paragraph and sat up. By the flood zone clause, his hand stopped moving. When he hit the tax arrears schedule and the "as is" with disclosure acknowledged language, initialed twice by Tiffany, he set the coffee down like it had gone bad. "This is comprehensive," he said. Geneva smiled the way only a retired tax attorney can, politely, with edge. "It's complete." He looked at me as if I had conjured the document out of spite. I folded my gloved hands. "It's just paper," I said. "Paper with boundaries." He skimmed to the attached memos, intent to gift, filed the week before the funeral. Notice of known property conditions, recipient acknowledgement of financial liabilities. Each page carried Tiffany's tidy, looping signatures. Each page had a timestamp Geneva could recite by heart. He leaned back and exhaled. My recommendation to my client, he said carefully, is to walk away. Immediately. From the hallway there was the faint sound of a stapler, the quiet hum of an office that had seen every flavor of family implosion. Sunlight traced a narrow rectangle over the carpet. Outside, a jay screamed in the live oak. "We don't need a recommendation," Geneva replied. "We need acknowledgement. There is no fraud. There was gift, with disclosure and acceptance. Bound by law." He nodded. "I'll convey that." And, Geneva added, tapping the final page, "Tell your client that further contact with Ms. Ellison will be considered harassment. Any demands for money will be referred to the clause titled Recipient Assumes Costs." He didn't argue. He didn't reach for the coffee again. He just gathered the pages with careful fingers, like they might cut him. Understood. News traveled faster than heat in Savannah in July. By afternoon, Tiffany sent a text to Ryan so long it broke into 3 bubbles. By evening, she'd gone from persuasion to performance. She arrived on my front walk without calling, perfume first, voice second. "You tricked me," she said, slicing the air with a manicured hand. "You wrapped liabilities as a gift. That's fraud." Geneva stood on my porch like a statue of common sense. "Fraud requires concealment," she said, not unkindly. "You signed disclosure on 6 separate pages." Tiffany's eyes went bright and wet, a practiced gleam. "You're not going to win public opinion on a technicality." I looked at the camellia bush beside the steps, the deep, glossy leaves. "I'm not trying to win public opinion, dear," I said. "I'm keeping a promise to myself." Across the street, a neighbor's screen door creaked. You could feel ears opening along the block. Ryan jogged up a minute later, breathless and already apologizing. "Can't we just—" "Mom, Tiff, let's talk like adults." "We did," Geneva said. "On paper." Tiffany's jaw flexed. "Then we'll see you in court." "Bring your reading glasses," Geneva murmured. They did try. A week later, a complaint landed. Fraud, undue influence, emotional distress. Geneva picked it up between 2 fingers like a dead wasp and laid it flat across my dining table. "Premature?" she said, sliding me a bowl of blueberries. "And thin." She drafted the response in an afternoon, the house smelling of lemon oil and something clean. She attached the memos she'd filed preemptively. Intent to gift before the funeral. Recipient acknowledgement the day after. A certified letter to Tiffany's counsel confirming assumption of all property-related costs. She included the municipal lien notices we'd sent, signed for, and photographed. She added the foundation estimate, the flood insurance quote, the HVAC repair loan. "We'll send a courtesy copy to their inbox," she said, "and a formal packet to their doorstep." That night, the packet reached them before their pride did. I knew because at 10:11 p.m., voices rose across the hydrangeas between their porch and mine. "You told me it was ours," Tiffany hissed, the kind of whisper that carries. "You said she'd fold?" "It's not my fault you didn't read," Ryan started. "Don't you dare," she said, louder now. "Don't you dare put this on me." A porch light flicked on 2 doors down. Somewhere a baby cried, then quieted. The azaleas caught every syllable like gossip and held it. I stood at my kitchen sink with the window open and rubbed rosemary between my fingers until the oils released. A small green punch of scent that woke the blood. I planted a sprig under the window before bed, pressing soil around it with the heel of my palm. "For remembrance," Geneva said when she found me there with dirt on my gloves at dawn. "Not regret," I answered. She handed me the morning mail, thin and white and harmless looking. "You know what she did take?" she asked as we climbed the steps. "Not just your house." I arched a brow. "She took her own future," Geneva said, out to the curb with the moving boxes. By week's end, Tiffany's lawyer called Geneva with a new voice, soft, almost deferent. "We're withdrawing the complaint," he said. "I've advised Ms. Ellison to cut losses." "Wise," Geneva replied, unbothered. They thought that would be the end of it. But houses aren't the only things with foundations. Late Friday, my phone started thudding against the counter, notifications stacking in quick little jolts. Geneva's did the same. Across town, screens lit up with the same clip. A grainy video 30 seconds long, shot at waist height amid black suits and lilies. The camera wobbled, caught the edge of a casket spray, then steadied near my shoulder. Tiffany leaned down in a sheath dress the color of a bruise and whispered into my ear, clear as a bell in the quiet room. "Your time's up. We'll take it from here." A beat. My profile. Still as a portrait. The faint crackle of tissues. And then the clip ended. The caption: "Funeral. Savannah. Daughter-in-law to widow." Within an hour, Tiffany's biggest brand posted a sterile square. "Due to recent revelations, we are discontinuing our partnership with Tiffany Ellison, effective immediately." My screen glowed white in the kitchen gloom. The rosemary at the window gave off one last green sigh. The funeral whisper had been recorded, and now it was everywhere. Sponsors were dropping her in real time. The tide had turned, not in court, but in the court of breath-held watchers with phones. And this time, the whole city was listening for what I'd say next. The clip was less than half a minute, but it was enough to reorder the weather in Savannah. A quiet funeral room, black sleeves, the pale shimmer of lilies in the background, and Tiffany leaning down, her lips almost brushing my ear. "Your time's up. We'll take it from here." Local news didn't just play it. They replayed it. Slow motion, with subtitles. The anchor's voice dipped into that reverent register reserved for national tragedies, but her eyes gave away the satisfaction of a story that would keep people watching through the ads. By noon, the grocery store checkout line was buzzing. By 2, Tiffany's social media comment sections had turned into bonfires. At 3, her biggest sponsor posted a pastel square announcing an immediate end to our partnership. And I was making tea. Geneva slid her tablet across my kitchen table. "You're trending," she said, the word tasting foreign on her lips. On the screen, my still frame from the clip. Face calm, hands folded, black veil casting a shadow like a signature. Underneath, the hashtag number sign, Southern Silence, was climbing by the minute. "You should claim it," Geneva said. "Claim what?" "The narrative. You've been framed as the quiet woman wronged. Now you can be the quiet woman who outlasted." She set up the profile herself. No photo beyond the same still from the funeral, no personal details. Just a name, Southern Silence, and one post to start. "Boundaries are the walls we build to keep our grief from being trampled." By nightfall, it had 40,000 likes. The next week unfolded like a slow pour of warm syrup. Every morning, Geneva handed me printouts, messages, reposts, little digital bouquets from women I'd never met. "You reminded me I'm not disposable." One letter began in neat, looping handwriting. Another came from a woman in Texas who wrote, "My daughter-in-law tried to erase me after my husband passed. Thank you for reminding me that ink dries on both sides." Some came with pressed flowers. Some came with return addresses I knew I'd never use. All of them felt like neighbors who had walked up my path just to sit a spell. Geneva suggested I use the attention. "Not for you," she said, "for someone who needs it." So I called the director of the women's shelter 2 blocks over. Within a week, I was sitting at a long folding table, listening to voices crack on the words "he took everything." The smell of coffee mixed with faint bleach, and the walls hummed with the sound of women realizing someone believed them. I didn't tell them my whole story. I didn't have to. They could read it between my pauses. Meanwhile, Tiffany was hemorrhaging followers and opportunities like a leaky faucet you couldn't fix with pretty towels. Every brand statement read the same. In light of recent events, we are reevaluating our collaboration. Ryan stayed quiet online, but not at home. Neighbors reported the shouting. The sound of a door slammed so hard the glass rattled. Through it all, I kept posting. Not rants, not receipts. Just short lines that landed like pebbles in a still pond. Grace is not weakness. Silence is not surrender. If they take your seat, build your own table. Some storms you invite, others you survive. People reposted them over floral backgrounds, embroidered them on pillows, printed them on mugs. I didn't do anything to stop it. Then, one afternoon, Geneva arrived with a thick envelope and a face like someone who'd been waiting to unwrap a surprise for weeks. "It's official," she said, handing me the paperwork. I flipped to the first page. In ORC, Tiffany Ellison, voluntary petition for bankruptcy. The words sat on the page, black and final. I imagined her at her dining table, papers spread like a bad hand of cards, trying to bargain with numbers that didn't care about her charm. "She's trying to stall the debt," Geneva said, tapping a clause with her fingernail. "She thinks she can hide from it in the court process." The sun was setting, spilling a copper wash through my kitchen window, catching the steam off the kettle. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp and insistent. I set the papers down slowly. "She can stall," I said, "but the clock doesn't stop." Outside, Geneva's phone buzzed with an alert. Tiffany had just filed an emergency motion in court. Whatever she was planning next, it wasn't retreat. It was a counterstrike. 30 days. That's all she had left. The notice was small. 3 lines of bank language tucked into a letter Tiffany barely read before tossing it on the kitchen counter. But numbers don't care about pride. Interest doesn't forgive. And property taxes, once deferred under my husband's veteran exemption, had tripled the moment his death certificate hit the county clerk's desk. It was the kind of math that grew fangs. From my side of the street, I watched her pacing the porch, phone pressed to her ear, a brittle smile aimed at a conversation that clearly wasn't going her way. The wind lifted her silk blouse, but it couldn't lift the weight settling on her shoulders. Geneva sat at my kitchen table, pen in hand, legal pad between us. "She's filed a hardship extension before?" "3 times since the funeral," I said. "Each one just buys her another week of hope she can't afford." "She's about to find out the bank doesn't blink," Geneva replied, her voice smooth as the tea cooling between us. I picked up the old cordless phone and dialed the mortgage broker, using my maiden name, the one on the original deed, back before Tiffany knew this house existed. The woman on the other end had the tired efficiency of someone who had said the same sentences 1,000 times. 30 days until default," she confirmed. "If the arrears aren't cleared, foreclosure proceedings will begin. Sales already on the next auction calendar." "Thank you," I said, and meant it. Information is the most dangerous gift to give a woman like me. By the next morning, Geneva had everything in motion: a shell company with an unremarkable name, a clean LLC, ready to bid at auction. "Palmetto Crescent," she said, pushing the paperwork toward me. "Sounds like a landscaping business. Harmless. Invisible." She'd even arranged for a third-party bidder, someone the other regulars on the courthouse steps wouldn't question. "Cashier's checks?" she asked. I slid an envelope across the table, already in hand, enough to buy it twice. "Not for her sake," Geneva said. "No," I replied, "for the house." Tiffany's social media went silent 2 days later. No more curated breakfast shots, no sunset wine glasses clinking. Just nothing. Ryan, too, seemed to be shrinking from view. I spotted him one afternoon loading cardboard boxes into the back of his sedan, the kind you get from grocery stores when you're not planning to stay anywhere long. By the end of the week, word got around. He'd moved into a rental on Drayton Street. He didn't call me. I didn't expect him to. The bank moved faster than she did. Their petition to lift the bankruptcy stay slid through court like it was greased. Geneva read it aloud, each word a clean cut. "She's out of road," she said. "Auction date, first Tuesday of the month. Noon. Courthouse steps." I thought of the house then. Not the debt, not the drama, just the bones of it. The way the late sun spilled through the parlor windows, the feel of the doorframe my husband had sanded by hand, the faint smell of lemon oil from years of Sunday polishing. It had weathered storms, repairs, even my own grief. It deserved a clean breath. We spent the days before the auction preparing as if for company, lining up the contractor, scheduling the locksmith, choosing paint colors with names like pearl and soft magnolia. I bought rosemary for the front sill, the scent sharp enough to cut through any memories she might have left behind. "Do you think she'll show?" I asked Geneva. "If she does," Geneva said, "it'll be for theater. She doesn't have the means to bid. Pride is all she's got left." Auction day came hot and heavy, the kind of Savannah noon where the bricks underfoot hold the morning's heat like a grudge. The crier's voice carried over the shuffle of papers and murmured numbers, parcel after parcel moving like beads on a rosary. When they read out my address, I felt the shift. Not in the crowd, but in me. Geneva's contact, hat low, raised his hand on Palmetto Crescent's behalf. A man in sunglasses countered, then faltered when the number climbed. In 3 minutes, it was done. "Sold," the crier called, stamping the paperwork with a finality you could feel in your teeth. We drove back in silence, the receipt with its embossed seal sitting between us. Geneva's hands were steady on the wheel, her eyes bright with something halfway between satisfaction and anticipation. She pulled into my driveway, killed the engine, and finally turned to me. "Want to place the first bid?" she asked. I smiled. I already did. The auction room smelled like old paper and coffee that had turned mean. Ceiling fans whirred lazily, moving air that wasn't interested in going anywhere. Men in tan suits clustered near the front, their faces turned toward the clerk as if she were reading scripture. Geneva and I took seats in the last row. We looked like two ladies waiting on hymnals. "Remember," she murmured, sliding a folded document into my palm like a pressed flower. "You don't exist here. He does." She nodded toward the third party we'd retained, a clean-shaven broker with an expression as blank as the first page of a ledger. The clerk tapped the microphone. The room adjusted its posture. "Foreclosure. Ellison, Magnolia Street. Opening at 2:30. She began to chant numbers like a spell. The broker lifted his bidder card and set it back down with the rhythm of a heartbeat. Another man barked a challenge. The chant sharpened, the numbers climbed, the fans kept turning like they had better things to do than keep pace with a woman's revenge. I didn't look at Geneva. I didn't look at anyone. I looked down at my gloved hands and remembered Tiffany's whisper in my kitchen, "Your time's up," and tasted the copper of it like a penny on the tongue. "Sold," the clerk declared, at a number we'd agreed on in a room with no witnesses but God and the dust motes. The gavel cracked. The sound was small and absolute. Outside, Savannah's heat rolled over us, thick with magnolia and car exhaust. The broker shook Geneva's hand. She shook his like a woman who had written this ending in pencil months ago and had just traced it in ink. "Paperwork in 48, she said, crisp. "Notice in 72. It didn't take that long. By Friday morning, an eviction was taped to the front door, white paper fluttering against black paint, the words as polite and ruthless as a funeral program. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. Through the lace panels, I could see Tiffany's silhouette pacing, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice lifted, shrill and disbelieving. then stumbled into tears that didn't move me an inch. The movers arrived 2 days later, early enough that the cicadas were still rehearsing. Geneva stood on the porch steps with a clipboard and a straw hat, cool as a glass of iced tea. "Bedrooms first," she told the foreman. "Attic after. Anything marked E stays, anything marked T, trash." "Trash?" he echoed, startled. "Bless your heart," she said gently. "It's a category." They worked like tide, flowing in, flowing out, boxes thumping, tape ripping, the faint tang of dust rising from old rugs being rolled like scrolls. Tiffany appeared on the lawn, wrapped in indignation and yesterday's mascara. "You can't just—" she began. Geneva lifted a page and pointed to a paragraph. "We can," she said. "And we are." Ryan hovered behind her, eyes flat with the dawning realization that neutrality is not a virtue when the house is on fire. He didn't meet my gaze. That was fine. I wasn't offering him shelter from the smoke. By noon, the house breathed again. You could hear it. In the quiet way the foyer settled after footsteps, in the cool hush that returned to the study like a dog to its original master. I stepped over the threshold. The smell hit me first. Lemon oil beneath fresh paint, and underneath both, the faint memory of pipe tobacco from a winter when my husband had fixed the hinge on the pantry door and then kissed my temple without flowering me with sawdust. I walked the rooms without touching anything. In the dining room, I stopped and laid 2 fingers against the doorway he'd built with his brother the summer they promised themselves they'd outlast every storm. The wood was smooth, the grain warm under my glove. "We're home," I told it. It didn't answer. It didn't need to. "Kitchen?" Geneva asked softly from behind me. "The appliances go," I said. "Everyone she replaced. I don't care if they're brand new. If she chose it, it leaves." Noted. In the bedroom, I paused at the window and watched movers load a lacquered console, Tiffany's idea of old money, into a truck that would take it to a consignment shop that would rename it Mid-Century Modern to comfort whoever bought it. I felt nothing. Grief sat beside me like a well-behaved dog. Present, contained, mine. The doorbell rang. The sound shivered through the empty front hall. Geneva beat me to the porch and opened it to a young man holding a press badge and a notebook too clean for Savannah. He blinked at Geneva, then at me over her shoulder. "Mrs. Ellison, I'm with the Journal. Well, can we?" He gestured past us toward the rooms that had housed our mistakes and our miracles. I stepped forward, the sun flashing on the brass of the knocker. Behind him, the magnolia leaves shone like polished leather. Somewhere a lawnmower muttered its summer hymn. "Let the house speak for itself," I said, and closed the door with the kind of gentleness reserved for babies and bombs. We finished at dusk. The last box thudded down the porch steps, and the mover's truck pulled away, taillights bleeding red into the lavender evening. Geneva locked the front door and handed me the new key. It lay in my palm heavier than it ought to, cool like a coin, familiar like a prayer. I didn't put it on my ring. I held it, felt its edges, and thought of the day I'd hang it on a nail by the back door and forget the weight, because its work would be done. Headlights swung across the lawn. A sedan stopped at the curb. A woman in a navy pencil skirt climbed out, heels stabbing the grass as if it had offended her. She walked up the path with the stiff-lipped politeness of someone paid to deliver bad news to people who already know it. "Mrs. Ellison?" she asked, flipping open a folder. "Yes," I said. She slid an envelope into my hand. The paper was thick and smug. "You've been served," she said. "Ellison v. Ellison. Emotional distress." The envelope warmed in my palm as if it had a fever. I smiled once, small and sharp. Somewhere behind the door, the house exhaled like it was tired of eavesdropping. "Of course," I said lightly, passing the envelope to Geneva as if it were junk mail. She's always late to her own endings. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and nerves. The wooden benches were hard, the kind that force you to sit up straighter than you want to. Tiffany sat at the plaintiff's table, wrapped in a beige trench coat that was meant to suggest elegance, but looked more like armor. Her hair was smooth, glossy, controlled. Her eyes, already rimmed in red, waited for their moment. Geneva and I took our seats without looking her way. She was here to perform. I was here to end the show. The judge, a silver-haired man with the posture of someone who'd seen too many petty wars disguised as legal battles, adjusted his glasses and said, "Let's begin." Tiffany's lawyer stood, smoothing his tie like he was trying to erase wrinkles from the truth. "Your Honor, my client has suffered severe emotional distress at the hands of the defendant, Mrs. Ellison." "Margaret," I murmured under my breath. "Just for me." The lawyer continued with theatrical pauses, gesturing toward Tiffany like she was a porcelain figure in danger of shattering. Words like betrayal, malice, callous disregard floated into the air like perfume that doesn't suit you. Tiffany dabbed her eyes at all the right beats. Then Geneva stood. No fanfare, no flourish. She simply placed a box on the defense table, flipped the lid, and began pulling out folders as if she were setting out teacups for an afternoon visit. "Your Honor," she said, her voice smooth as silk pulled over steel. "Every clause of this agreement was signed, initialed, and notarized by the plaintiff. Every liability was disclosed in writing with plain language summaries, at least twice. And—" she reached into her briefcase and withdrew a small flash drive. "There's this." She handed it to the clerk. A moment later, the courtroom filled with the tinny sound of Tiffany's voice, recorded clear as the July sun. "Your time's up. We'll take it from here." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut paper. The judge's brow arched just slightly. "Well, that certainly contextualizes matters." Tiffany's lawyer started to sputter. That's not relevant to the—" "It's relevant to intent," Geneva cut in, her voice so polite it stung. "My client acted within her legal rights. The plaintiff simply regrets the consequences she signed up for." The judge leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "Mrs. Ellison, I've seen cases of fraud. This isn't one. This is—" He exhaled as though searching for the word. "Self-inflicted misfortune. Case dismissed." The gavel came down with a sound that was almost gentle. Almost. I stood. I didn't look at Tiffany. I didn't need to. My silence was the loudest thing I could give her. The room shifted as people began to stand. One sharp clap cracked through the air. Just one. Someone in the back row. It echoed for a moment before being swallowed by the shuffle of feet and the closing of briefcases. Outside, the autumn air was brisk, carrying the scent of wet leaves and exhaust. The courthouse steps stretched before me like a clean path. I'd taken 3 when her voice rang out. "You ruined my life!" Tiffany's scream ricocheted off the stone columns, desperate and furious. I turned my head just enough for her to see my profile. "I just handed it to you," I said softly, and kept walking. Geneva caught up to me halfway to the car. She didn't speak until we were inside, the door closing us in like a vault. Then she reached into her satchel and slid a folder across the seat toward me. Its tab read, in her precise handwriting, "Final Severance." I ran my fingertips over the paper, feeling the weight of it. Not heavy, but absolute. "What is it?" I asked, though I already suspected. "Every legal, financial, and emotional tie, cut," Geneva said. "Irreversible. She's no longer your problem in any capacity." The folder sat between us like a loaded weapon. I thought of the day this had all begun, of the whisper, of the funeral, of the woman who mistook my silence for surrender. I smiled, slow and sure. "Then let's sign it." The severance wasn't just symbolic. It was real, final, and irreversible. Every tie between Mags and Tiffany had just been severed for good. We signed the severance in blue-black ink, the kind that doesn't fade, then went home by way of Victory Drive. Spanish moss bowed over us like gray-green applause. Geneva parked in her new driveway, next door to mine, and we sat a moment with the engine ticking as it cooled, breathing the same October air like women who'd outrun a storm. Inside, my house had changed its voice. No more thudding footsteps up the hall, no more brittle laughter rehearsed for guests. The rooms breathed. I opened every window and let Savannah in. Jasmine faint as a remember this, river salt riding the breeze from the east, the low sound of someone's wind chimes counting time. Renovation, when it's penance and rebirth both, starts with light. I chose paint the color of new paper. Soft ecru for the parlor, a pale oyster for the hall, a clean bone white for the bedroom that made all the old shadows admit they were only dust. The contractors lifted rugs, pried up warped boards, whistled when they found the heart pine beneath. Worth saving, one said, palm flat to the grain like a benediction. I nodded. That was the point. Gone went the heavy drapes. Linen shears rose and fell like a quiet tide. I swapped brass for brushed nickel, velvet for cotton, grief for order. The study, my husband's sanctuary, kept its built-ins and the dent at the edge of his desk where he'd tapped a pencil through 1,000 numbers. We left that. Some marks you frame. Neighbors drifted by as the weeks unspooled. You're back, Mrs. Lambert said, setting a pound cake on my steps like an offering. Properly, I answered and meant it. The house answered too. Floorboards settling with grateful creaks, the HVAC humming like a contented cat now that the loan-funded install was finally completed and paid down. Not by me, not anymore. On Thursdays, we tried something small and stubborn. By 6, women arrived with dog-eared paperbacks and Tupperware, pimento cheese, deviled eggs wearing paprika freckles, a bottle of Viognier, damp with condensation. Book club, we called it. But after the first meeting, the spine of the thing was survivors, divorcees, widows, daughters of difficult mothers, mothers of absent sons. We talked about sentences, and then we talked about sentences that had put us in rooms we didn't deserve, and how we had walked out anyway. Boundaries feel rude at first, I told them, slicing a lemon tart so thin you could hold it to the window and see light. Then they feel like breath. On Sundays, the circle was quieter. We lit 3 candles and told the truth in present tense. I didn't advertise it. The Grapevine handled our RSVP list with more grace than any website could. Some women cried. Some didn't. I put a kettle on, warmed cups with water first the way my mother taught me, and we learned how silence could be shelter when you owned it, and a cage when you didn't. Geneva's retirement startled Savannah for all of 2 days. By Monday, she'd hung chimes on her back porch and put her framed bar certificate in the hallway, not the office. I like to remember I'm finished, she said, setting a pitcher of mint tea on my table without asking, like the oldest friends do. She took to evening walks around the square, nodding to the bronze soldier atop his plinth like an equal. Next door suits her. From my kitchen window, I can see her porch lamp snap on like a star that keeps its promises. A letter arrived from Ryan in mid-November, the envelope familiar as his 3rd-grade handwriting. He'd chosen a pen that smeared. Can we talk? 3 words. No return address beyond the postmark that tattooed him in a rented neighborhood I knew, for thin walls and cheaper locks. I didn't write back. Some doors, once closed, stop being doors. They turn into walls you hang art on. Savannah did what it does when drama exhausts itself. It returned to hospitality, now honest. Shopkeepers asked after me by name and didn't press. The barista spelled Mags right on the lid. The mailman, And this is the kind of small mercy that tells on a place. Set my packages behind the column when it rained without ringing. A city is a chorus. Mine had learned my new note. The Tiffany reports came secondhand. Geneva heard it from the clerk at Whole Foods. I heard it from Mrs. Lambert's niece who works social at the newspaper. A silhouette at dawn pulling a suitcase down her rental steps. A ride-share idling with its hazards ticking like a metronome. No farewell posts, no statement. Just absence and wet tire marks. Sometimes departure is the only apology a person can afford. The house settled fully in winter. I slept with the window cracked. Let the fog find my hairline, painted my nails the pale pink my husband always liked because it made my hands look like magnolia petals. I cooked again. Gumbo, when the air got mean, skillet cornbread so hot it split the butter, coffee black and faithful. I rearranged the framed photographs and took none down. The young man with the narrow tie who became my husband, the baby who became my son, the women who became my mirrors. I didn't flinch. Memory can be a weapon. I made it a quilt. One morning, the air broke open into spring without asking. I woke to a zillion birds arguing doctrine in the live oaks and felt that old, low-slung ache in my chest turn into something gentler. The front yard, newly quiet of foot traffic, seemed to be waiting. The soil near the walk held a square of sunlight like a palm. I called the nursery on Skidaway. "You still have her?" I asked. The man laughed. "We always got her." Geneva helped me haul the black plastic drum from the truck bed to the soft dirt. We wrestled it free, roots coiled and ready. "Sure about front yard?" she asked, wiping her brow with the back of her wrist. "Everyone will see." "That's the point," I said. "We're done hiding the good things." We set her in, centered and proud. A young magnolia, glossy leaves catching the light, tight fists of blossoms the color of creamy custard waiting to explode into perfume and bees. I knelt. The earth's damp went right through my jeans, the smell of loam and old leaves rising up, the grit cool beneath my nails. I thought of my mother's hands, capable as a carpenter's, gentle as linen, and the way she'd say plant deep enough it can hold itself. Geneva handed me the hose like one friend handing another a line. Water hissed and darkened the circle, ran down to the roots. The first drip rolled off a new leaf, quivered like a jewel, fell and disappeared where it would do the most good. The neighborhood slowed. A jogger took out her earbuds and smiled. A little boy on a scooter stopped to stare like the tree might tell him a secret if he stood still enough. "What's her name?" he asked. "Magnolia," I said, "but we'll let her tell us the rest." We tamped the last of the soil, smoothed it with the flat of our palms. A breeze carried the promise of that future bloom, lemon and cream, and the kind of sweetness that doesn't apologize. I stood and pressed my hand against the new trunk until the bark warmed beneath my skin. I had given a woman my house and watched her drown in it. I had taken it back and taught it to breathe. Now I was planting something that would outlive both of us. Geneva stepped back, squinting, measuring with a lawyer's eye and a neighbor's heart. "Perfect," she said. The magnolia shivered like agreement. I tied a strip of my mother's old handkerchief to the sapling's stake, a white pennant catching the sun, and whispered, "Grow." The knot held. The next breeze lifted it and carried the scent of magnolia toward the porch, where a new file waited on my table. Estate plan. Final draft. The magnolia bloomed before I did. One morning in late spring, I stepped onto the porch with my coffee. And there it was. 3 thick ivory blossoms, each bigger than my hand, filling the yard with a perfume so rich it felt like velvet in the air. The tree had kept her promise, even if I'd only planted her a year ago. That year had been my own season of rooting, of watering the parts of me I'd neglected. Inside, the house was not just alive, it was whole. Laughter drifted from the kitchen where the book club women were setting out dishes for tonight's meeting. The sound of scissors snipping herbs came from the side garden where two of the shelter's new residents were clipping rosemary. The place had gone from a battlefield to a harbor, and the walls seemed to hum with it. At the dining table, the estate folder sat open, the legal pages clipped together, my handwriting on the final signature line. The home, with all its history and ghosts, was going to the Magnolia Women's Shelter. No conditions, no catches. The thought made me lighter, as if the deed itself was the last heavy stone in my pocket, and I had just dropped it into the river. Geneva arrived in her usual unannounced way, letting the screen door sigh shut behind her. She carried a brown paper bag of peaches, the smell of summer trailing her. "It's done," I said, sliding the file toward her. She flipped the folder open, eyes scanning the clean lines. "You think she ever understood what you were doing?" I leaned back in my chair, fingers wrapped around my mug. Not the house, not the cost, not me. I let the pause stretch, feeling the weight of it. And that's fine. If she had understood, it wouldn't have worked. Geneva nodded slowly, as if she were sealing a verdict in her mind. "Some debts. You can't pay with money." I smiled. Small, but real. Then I gave her exactly what she wanted. My time. The porch was bathed in late afternoon light by the time the papers were signed and the pen set down for the last time. I closed the file, my thumb resting for a moment on the tab I'd labeled a year ago in steady black ink. Debt paid. From the yard, the magnolia's scent rose again, curling into the air around us. Geneva leaned against the rail, watching the women in the garden talk and laugh like they'd been friends for years. "You know," she said, "this place doesn't feel like it's yours anymore." "It isn't," I said, standing to join her. "It's theirs. And that's how I know I'm finally free." Somewhere far away, a world away from this porch, a woman named Tiffany was living whatever life she could stitch together. I didn't picture her much anymore, not because I'd forgiven her, but because she no longer took up space I could use for better things. As the first guests arrived for the evening gathering, I poured glasses of sweet tea, set out bowls of peach slices, and let the sounds of welcome fill the air. The sun slipped lower, gilding the magnolia leaves with fire. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't counting the years behind me. I was counting the days ahead. She got the house. And the bills. I got the last breath. And made it count.